This recording is published by Langogh, 2025. This recording is copyright. This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. You will hear a conversation between two or more people. You will be asked to answer questions based on the conversation. You will have 30 seconds to read the questions before the recording begins. Now listen carefully and answer questions. Good afternoon, Emily and Ryan. Let's discuss your preparation for the environmental policy debate. Environmental policy debates require balancing economic growth with ecological preservation, which means you'll need to consider multiple stakeholder perspectives. How are you approaching this?
Afternoon, Dr. Thompson. We've been researching various policy instruments, but I'm particularly concerned about carbon taxation. While it can incentivize emissions reduction, it disproportionately affects low-income households who spend a larger percentage of their income on energy.
That's a valid concern. I've been focusing on renewable energy subsidies, which accelerate the transition to sustainable energy sources. They create market opportunities and stimulate innovation in green technology sectors.
Both perspectives are important. Emily, how would you address the regressive nature of carbon taxes in your argument?
I'm considering proposing revenue recycling mechanisms, where carbon tax revenues are redistributed to vulnerable populations through direct payments or targeted assistance programs. This could maintain the price signal while mitigating social inequality.
That's interesting. However, resistance from established industries with significant lobbying power remains a challenge in implementing green technology regulations. Fossil fuel companies have deep political connections that can obstruct policy progress.
You're identifying crucial obstacles. Political polarization hindering consensus building is another significant barrier. What strategies might overcome these challenges?
International cooperation in environmental policy is essential but difficult due to conflicting national interests. Developed and developing nations have different priorities and capacities for implementing environmental measures.
Exactly. The Paris Agreement demonstrates both the potential and limitations of international frameworks. Some countries have made substantial commitments while others have withdrawn or failed to meet targets.
You're touching on critical geopolitical dimensions. Remember to anticipate counter-arguments and prepare evidence-based rebuttals. What opposing arguments do you expect to encounter?
Critics often argue that environmental regulations harm economic competitiveness and lead to job losses in traditional industries. We need robust data showing that long-term economic sustainability through green jobs can offset these concerns.
We should also emphasize improved public health outcomes from cleaner air and water. Studies from cities implementing strict emissions standards show measurable decreases in respiratory diseases and healthcare costs.
Excellent. Those are precisely the kinds of evidence-based arguments that strengthen your position. What about the temporal dimension of policy impacts?
Short-term economic costs deterring policy adoption is definitely a major obstacle. Politicians facing election cycles often prioritize immediate economic indicators over long-term environmental benefits.
This is where effective communication becomes crucial. We need to frame environmental policy not as a burden but as an investment opportunity that creates competitive advantages in emerging global markets.
Well articulated. How are you structuring your debate arguments to maximize persuasive impact?
We're planning to open with compelling statistical evidence about climate change acceleration, then present policy solutions with concrete implementation frameworks and cost-benefit analyses.
I'll focus on technological innovation aspects, highlighting how policy incentives have historically driven breakthrough developments in renewable energy efficiency and storage capacity.
Sound strategy. What about addressing the equity dimensions of environmental policy across different socio-economic groups?
Environmental justice is central to our argument. Marginalized communities often bear disproportionate burdens of pollution and climate impacts while having least access to mitigation resources. Policy must explicitly address these disparities.
We should also discuss how green infrastructure investments can revitalize economically depressed areas, creating employment opportunities in retrofitting buildings and developing public transportation systems.
You're connecting environmental policy to broader social and economic development goals effectively. Have you considered the role of corporate responsibility in your analysis?
Absolutely. We're examining how mandatory environmental reporting and disclosure requirements can drive corporate behavior change by increasing transparency and stakeholder accountability.
Consumer pressure is also significant. Companies facing boycotts or negative publicity over environmental practices often implement changes faster than regulatory compliance alone would achieve.
Those market-based mechanisms complement regulatory approaches well. What timeline are you proposing for policy implementation in your debate position?
We're advocating for phased implementation with clear milestone targets over 10 to 15 years, allowing industries time to adapt while maintaining urgency given climate science projections.
The phased approach also facilitates monitoring and adjustment based on empirical outcomes, rather than rigid adherence to policies that may prove ineffective or counterproductive.
Adaptive management is crucial for complex policy challenges. How will you incorporate scientific uncertainty into your arguments without undermining your position?
We'll acknowledge that precise climate predictions contain uncertainty ranges, but emphasize that scientific consensus on anthropogenic warming and its serious consequences is overwhelming and demands precautionary action.
The risk management framework is helpful here. Even if we can't predict exact outcomes, the potential catastrophic costs of inaction far exceed the costs of implementing preventive measures.
Excellent framing. Let's discuss your research sources. What types of evidence are you prioritizing?
We're drawing from peer-reviewed climate science journals, economic analyses from institutions like the International Monetary Fund, and case studies from countries successfully implementing comprehensive environmental policies.
I've been analyzing data from the International Renewable Energy Agency showing exponential growth in renewable capacity and dramatic cost reductions over the past decade, which strengthens the feasibility argument.
Diverse, credible sources strengthen your position substantially. How are you preparing for the rebuttal phase of the debate?
We're anticipating arguments about economic disruption and preparing counterexamples from Germany's energy wind and Denmark's wind energy transition, which maintained economic growth while dramatically reducing emissions.
We should also address the false dichotomy between environmental protection and economic prosperity, demonstrating how they can be mutually reinforcing through innovation and efficiency improvements.
That's sophisticated argumentation. What about addressing concerns regarding national sovereignty in environmental governance?
International environmental agreements respect sovereignty while creating cooperative frameworks. Countries maintain autonomy in implementation methods while committing to shared objectives and transparency mechanisms.
Visit langogh.com to view the answers to these questions or to access more tests.